Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us today and learning something new, right? So, this is Fiza Amjad. I'm the CEO and co-founder of atomcamp, and we are a tech platform, and we focus on AI and emerging skills, tech skills. We do B2B and B2C skill development courses, workshops, and trainings. And this is these webinars, these series of webinars. Some of you may already have attended them before. We have this partnership with the Ministry of IT and Telecommunication in Pakistan, and we bring in experts and speakers from all around the world to tell you exactly what's going on in the tech ecosystem. What can you do to be to you know to be a successful professional, tech professional in this in Pakistan's market and global market, and generally what are the trends to look out for? As we know, AI is everywhere. It's a buzzword, but we also need to understand what it holds for us, what it means for us, and what should be the roadmap regarding it. And for today, we have invited Ms. Rida Kadri. Thank you so much for joining us today. She is a PhD in computational urban science and a master's in urban studies from MIT. And she's currently an AI researcher, a senior scientist at Google Research. I will let her introduce herself more in a more elaborative way. But over here today, we will talk about several things, and uh, there are 3 to 4 main points that she will be covering. And one of them is technical skills that, for example, data literacy, some tools, some motivation that you need to learn to stay relevant. Human skills, for instance, human skills that AI cannot replace. So this is going to be really fun to know why human to human interaction is still very important. And then how do you build a growth mindset? Thank you so much, Rida, for joining, and over to you. But first, sorry, just one more thing. I will let you speak for about 25 to 30 minutes. And then I will ask the audience to, if they have questions, they will write them down in the chat. We will not open anyone's mic. And then I will speak them out so that we can have that sort of interaction with the audience. Over to you.
Sounds good. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Um, I'll just share my screen. And then let's see. Okay. Great. फिजा मुझे अब audience नजर नहीं आ रहा, so if you need to say something, just speak up because I can
Sure,
only.
sure. And we
Okay,
can see the screen. Thank you.
okay, perfect. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. As Fiza said, we'll talk a little bit today about how we can prepare for an AI-driven future. I will speak for a little bit, but please feel free to ask questions. अगर कोई ऐसी चीज हो जो मैं cover ना करूं, that you're curious about, please feel free to ask. So who am I? I'm a senior research scientist at Google Research. And my main work focus is looking at how AI actually fails outside, the Western world. So outside countries like the US and UK, fails in places like Pakistan. And there's a lot of hype around AI and how AI is going to change the world, and it is, changing so many things right now. But as you might know, as a lot of my research shows, AI has massive capability gaps in outside English and outside, kind of like the big Western countries. And this is not new, like agar aapko yaad hoga, Google Maps, when initially was launched in Pakistan, it would keep sending us down, these small galiyan, and cars would get stuck there because Google Maps designers actually could not imagine that there would be roads in a city that are so narrow that a car can't pass by. Because the assumption always is, in the US, that if there's a road, a car can pass by. Um, and so technology, when it is designed in Silicon Valley, and that's a lot of my research, is often not designed for users that have very different needs than needs of users in the West. And so AI sort of has very similar problems. So if you look at this image that was recently generated, using AI for a photo of a group of women chatting in front of Wazir Khan Mosque, which is obviously, as we know, in Lahore. So there's definitely a capability gap, right? Like it doesn't work as well as in Urdu. It doesn't like have as much knowledge about like our cultures. But there's definitely also a lot of Western assumptions that get encoded in it. So about things like, if you've ever asked it to write an email, communication in the US looks very different from communication in Pakistan. So communication in the US might be very informal if you want to write an email to your manager. But what AI sort of assumes, the communication norms it assumes will be that of the US. Um, for example, like, calling people by their first name. All of us call our managers by their first name, but that might not be true in Pakistan. Um, so that's sort of like my research, kind of thinking about how to both understand some of these failures, but also think about how to improve them. And I can talk a little bit more about my research in like the Q&A if people are curious. So how did I get here? What was sort of my journey? I did social sciences at LUMS. From there, I did a Fulbright scholarship and I went to my master's at MIT, and then also from there started a PhD at MIT. In this time period, I did internships at Uber 1 year and Microsoft Research the other year. And this is really when I started getting interested in tech as a career. Before that, I sort of had not really conceptualized going to tech as a career, even though I was studying technology. Um, I was sort of studying its social impact. I was studying its how it's designed. I was studying sort of like how algorithms fail. Um, but then increasingly, as I was studying this, it felt like the best use of my knowledge might be in tech companies that are trying to build products and trying to understand, how these products might work in the rest of the world. Because now the US actually is not the biggest market for technology anymore. It is, it is the non-Western world because of increasing population and increasing adoption. So companies are always very curious about how to globalize their technologies. And then from these internships, I got sort of a good sense of what a tech career would look like, and so I eventually joined Google Research right after my PhD. So that, I think, is one good way of thinking about your eventual career. Trying out different internships, trying out different types of roles to try to then understand like where do you eventually want to end up. Okay, so what is the current state of affairs? AI is obviously here. I'm sure all of you have used, ChatGPT. You've sort of heard about it if you haven't used it. One of the biggest impacts right now that is predicted for AI is that the job market will change, and it is already changing. In particular, for software engineering and for computer science. So Pakistan has always prioritized producing coders, but pure coding jobs where you only thing you're doing is just writing like very standard code, just debugging, are increasingly being handled by AI platforms, or by like no code platforms. And Pakistan obviously needs to adapt, and so all of us need to adapt to this changing market. And pure coding jobs will just become less and less valuable, especially at the entry level. So, but there is an opportunity here, which is that people are still figuring out the human side of AI. तो मतलब AI के साथ आपने करना क्या है? A lot of the models that exist right now, so these kind of big models like ChatGPT, for example, is what we call general purpose models. So, they can do everything. They've been trained on data sets from the entire internet. और आप उनको कहोगे ईमेल लिख दो वो ईमेल लिख देंगे, आप उनको कहो कोडिंग कर दो वो कोडिंग कर देंगे. आप you want them to like generate an image, they'll generate an image. but they're general purpose in the sense that they haven't necessarily been trained for a very specific task, which means that people can do everything with them, but the companies are actually not really sure what people want to use them for, and and because of that, they're not sure what interfaces to make in the future. What form actually this technology will take. So if you think back 30 years or 40 years, if you remember, or if you've sort of read about this, initially when computers were invented, um, we could only talk to them in this like command line interface where you would like write out instructions in the command line, and then that's how computers would respond. And then we got graphical user interfaces, so we started clicking on things, we got icons. From there, now then we got touch as a modality, then we got voice as a modality. So AI abhi apne command line interface era mein hai. We don't know what the um, people are trying out different things, but it's very unclear what it's like actually important use cases will be, what those interfaces will look like. So there is a lot to do in that side, and that's what I want to focus on um, a little bit. Um, so you should think about the real value. What is if you when you want to think about what is the real value of humans in tech? Um, I think a lot about Steve Jobs and Apple products such as iPhone. So success in like these early eras of the cell phone, your smartphone, was not because they had engineered the best product, but they had sort of understood user behavior and had an instinct for what humans want and need for their interactions with technology. And actually, like Steve Jobs talked about this a lot also, that it's not just technology. You can't just make the most technically capable product, right? You have to think about why people want to use your technology, how they want to use the technology. And so, he talked a lot about liberal arts and humanities as an additional layer for technology. And that really is the future, where it's people who can design technology that actually works for people, who can see this intersection between humans and computers and machines, who can see how is this technology going to successfully solve real world problems. And there's so many problems for technology to solve. And this trend will only accelerate once, some of the like basic technological components will start getting, will increasingly start getting outsourced to AI. So leaders in the AI space will increasingly be those people who operate at the intersection of technical capacity and human needs. And because AI is actually making it so much easier to build these smaller prototypes, to work even without large teams, to work without a lot of funding, it actually opens up a lot of opportunity for a lot of people to experiment with these technologies. So what are some of the skills that we can learn now that are in addition to sort of some of the technical skills of coding that like people in Pakistan have always focused on? So one is kind of thinking about the problem, so problem framing and translation. So think about a social problem or a business problem or like a user problem, and think about how you turn that into technical questions or a technical solution. Thinking about what are being forward looking, thinking about look around you and think about when people are using AI, what are sort of some of the things that it's doing, what are the skills that it could displace. Building domain expertise. So as AI is increasingly touching many different fields, there's an increasing question of हर फील्ड में एआई क्या करेगा. अगर आप इफ यू रनिंग अ बिजनेस, तो एक सीईओ की जॉब एआई कैसे इफेक्ट करेगा. अगर आपका एग्रीकल्चरल का काम है, एग्रीकल्चर में एआई क्या करेगा, हेल्थ केयर में एआई क्या करेगा, एजुकेशन में एआई क्या करेगा. एंड इंक्रीजिंगली एट लीस्ट इन द यूएस पर्टिकुलरली, people are now looking for what they call domain expertise, which is कि एक particular domain का कोई expert हो, that expert will be able to tell you much better than like a software engineer what AI will do. So creating domain expertise is increasingly becoming a differentiating factor. So, if you want to think about AI for biology, yeah, I mean, recently, there's been a lot of news about AI that has been able to decode particular proteins, and like decode DNA. Uske liye, trying to get expertise from scientists, so that kind of domain expertise. And then, as you have already said, like kind of thinking about human-centered design. So things like, why are people using technology? How will they use technology, especially in our contexts? And no one really obviously can tell the future. So एक चीज जो हमें पता है technological innovation के बारे में, because of the history of technological innovation, is that we don't know what impacts will happen. But generally, the assumption is that more and more hybrid roles will become um, more popular. So not just being a software engineer, not just being a coder, but people who can bridge roles and bring different skills. So, what could an AI product manager look like? So someone who can bridge the engineering and the design and customer needs to define what the right problems might be. Again, someone who might be a domain specific AI specialist. So that would be able to tell you how for climate, um, or for cybersecurity, or for um, agriculture, AI will be used, and what meaningfully it can do in those things, in those spaces. Um, Policy and governance also extremely important, especially in our part of the world, because right now a lot of the policy and governance is being developed in EU, for example, and there is often a desire in like our parts of the world to just copy paste governance frameworks and policy frameworks from there to here. They obviously don't work because our social context, our legal context, um, our technology use context are totally different. So, people who will increasingly work on regulations, on global standards, on questions of fairness, on like when to use AI, when to not use AI, both at like policy for an organizational level. So, if you're in a newspaper organization, what should your AI policy be? Like if you're the BBC, what should your AI policy be? To like country level policy and governance experts. So that's also becoming increasingly very important. Um, and someone who can be an expert and go to particular businesses or like exist in particular businesses and translate the technical to other teams. So there are more and more jobs now coming up around like people who will have expertise in AI, but who can actually like understand the business needs and then say, oh, like here is what AI is doing in your business, and here's what the opportunity could be for integration. So almost like AI consultants. And so technical basics are of course necessary. So learning like particular languages, let's say Python. But it's important to remember that over the last many years, the specific language that you learn, whether that's JavaScript, whether that's C++, whether it's Python, the language has changed. What is the most most popular language? Companies कौन सी languages ढूंढ रही हैं. So it's the language is important, but what's more important is a solid conceptual understanding of overall programming and how what functions might be, what are you asking the machine to do when you write a particular code. So that's more important because you can always learn new languages and they'll keep adapting, and we're right at the start of the AI revolution, so we actually don't even know what languages of the future will be important. But things like data infrastructure, system design are of course all extremely important. But the final success will increasingly now depend on pairing them with some of this human interdisciplinary and contextual knowledge. But what does this mean for Pakistan specifically? So I've actually been studying technology in the developing world for around like 10 years. And I already mentioned this, but it's very clear that Silicon Valley actually does not know what the world needs. There are all of these assumptions of like technology sort of coming in and automating everything. But in our context, we know that automation completely does not solve all problems. And there's a lot of like localized solutions around automation that are needed. So for example, I was studying algorithmic matching in Indonesia. So like companies like Grab and Uber and Gojek, if you heard of like Grab and Gojek. And so they created these very like great like ride-hailing platforms, Uber ki tarah ke platforms, but also forgot that or didn't really pay attention as much to how on ground in our context, Google Maps doesn't work as well. Motorcycles break down, बारिश हो जाती है तो सड़कों पे flood हो जाते हैं. These are all problems that like Uber was not thinking about when they designed for the US, because wahan par, like all of these systems that this technology relies on work really well. Um, and so we live in countries and contexts where technology breaks down and people have to, jugaad karni padti hai to make it work. That actually is our superpower. That is design knowledge. Really should put it to work. You should be curious. And so what might that mean? So think about problem framing. So think about when you see a technical problem, learn to ask, or you see a technology, learn to ask, what is the real world problem that it is solving here? So if you're, for example, doing a Kaggle competition, which is kind of Kaggle is a platform there where you can do challenges and competitions around like we're using different data sets that are openly available. So if people haven't used it, it's a really good space to start practicing different technical skills using real world data sets. Think about, okay, like if there's a data set, like how would a shopkeeper in like Pakistan use this? Think about critical thinking. So don't accept tools as they are. Pick an AI tool. So like use, for example, ChatGPT. And as you are interacting with it, note down and start thinking about what are some of the limitations that it has in the Pakistani context or in your context, or what might be some like Western biases that you might be seeing in it. All of those things are actually important knowledge. Start noting them down and start then thinking about how might you solve those problems? What should have happened in this context? And this is not just true for AI. Think of it when you're using WhatsApp. Think of it when you're using Facebook. Think of it when you're using any form of technology. You'll start honing your skills. And those actually are going to become increasingly relevant. Communication is extremely important. So learn to communicate your ideas to different audiences in different contexts. So, one good practice is if you're a technical person, take a non-technical friend from a different disciplinary background and explain your ideas to them. Or I think another really great use case of AI is use AI to practice. Use AI to practice your language skills. Use AI to ask AI to take on like different personalities, and ask and practice your ideas with it. Both you can verbally practice and ask it to give you feedback, or you can like do written practice. So these are all important. So kind of like, I guess, as a summary, start thinking there is going to be more and more demand for people who can both do the technical side and the social side or the human side of technology, especially as we start figuring out what to do with this technology. So, think about these stories of technology breakdowns. Think about, ये AI models कहाँ आपके लिए काम नहीं कर रहे, technology आपके लिए कहाँ काम नहीं कर रही, उन लोगों के लिए काम नहीं कर रही जिनको आप जानते हैं या आपने story सुनी है, and think about, why that's happening. Think about like what are real Pakistani problems that AI can solve that only you uniquely can understand. Start using these like no-code, low-code platforms to do rapid prototyping of like small tools that might then solve those problems. And share them on LinkedIn, share them online, put them on your website, put them on your GitHub. And then most importantly, start layering in more knowledge beyond CS and AI skills. So for example, MIT now has all these new majors where they don't just do CS, but they add an additional major to it. So it's like CS and economics, CS and urban studies, because there's an understanding now that CS alone will not give you an edge in the future. And so those are the people now MIT is training. And so we have to think about how we can adapt to that world. So economics le lo, business le lo, urban planning le lo, design le lo, koi bhi build some kind of domain expertise on top of CS, and that'll also help you keep thinking about These are like a lot of these like build these critical thinking skills. Take like extra courses, so places like atomcamp, communication skill courses, resume writing courses, courses around how to build a website for yourself. And increasingly, obviously, AI is also really good at teaching you some of these things. So as much as you can use AI to practice some of these skills, that would be great, as opposed to just like outsourcing your work to it. So that is it from my side. I'll pause here, and then we can go to question answers.
Thank you, Rida. This was great. Actually, I really enjoyed listening to your the way you approach the skill problem, and how so many people come up to. By the way, I just want to tell my team to open up the chat for the audience to post their questions. So meanwhile, let the audience post their questions, and we can go one by one. I do want to mention over here that we get a lot of curious regarding कि हम लोग तो नॉन टेक बैकग्राउंड से नहीं है and we want to learn. For instance, atomcamp gives out data science and AI courses, and therefore we have uh, done this कि नॉन टेक के लिए हम डेटा एनालिटिक्स के कोर्सेज स्टार्ट करते हैं. थोड़ा सा आपका टेक का बैकग्राउंड हो तो हम डेटा साइंस एंड एआई का कोर्स करते हैं. तो इस तरह से हम इनको बताते हैं कि नहीं, अब जो एआई की लेयर है वो pretty horizontal है for all the fields now. It's not just a vertical field कि आप CS की डिग्री करके बैठ जाएं और आपको सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियरिंग की जॉब मिल जाएगी, but it's sort of interdisciplinary now. Going to the questions, I will tell this again to the audience that we will not be opening the mic, so please type in your questions over here. Um, how to deal with AI overconfidence, bias, and hallucinations? That's one of the questions.
Yeah, Phil, do you want me to just answer a question as you ask it?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, if you mean deal with it as I can answer it both ways. Deal with it as a consumer, and then also, or a user, and also deal with it maybe like a little bit like on like if you're trying to train models. As a user, I think a lot of people are like trusting AI blindly, right? They like put in something. They're like, oh, AI probably knows what it's talking about, but AI is not Google search. AI is not, the mechanism of Google search is very different from AI. So what AI is doing is, I mean, it's simplistic and you all probably know this, but what AI is doing is saying, if you have said a particular word, what is the most likely next word going to be? And so
Mm,
it is not necessarily always going to like trusted sources and necessarily picking something from a trusted source and giving it to you. That is now increasingly changing. Hallucinations have been a problem. A lot of companies have tried to deal with it. And so the way they deal with it is try to create retrieval augmented generation, which is force AI for anytime it's giving a fact, force it to go to a trusted source from the internet and like cite it and bring that and use that to answer your question. But it is not perfect. So anytime AI is telling you something, please read it and check it. And so that's a huge limitation of AI. If you're using it for research, do read it, edit it, act as if you are the supervisor for AI, and like this is a junior intern who has given you something, and it's your responsibility to check it. So that's how you would like deal with it from a being critical basically of AI constantly, is how you would deal with it as a user. But from the more technical side, what people have been doing is with the overconfidence thing, they're actually increasingly, OpenAI did this recently, they're trying to change actually its personality, both the overconfidence and what they call, like if you've noticed, it agrees with you a lot. So you can actually get AI to agree with anything you say. So you say, is this a good idea? AI will be like, oh yeah, this is such a great idea. And when you say the opposite thing, you say, is this a good idea? It'll be like, oh yeah, it's a great idea. And so that actually shows you again the like fundamental limitation that it's not actually thinking. But what it is doing is it is just responding to you in a way that feels most likely. And so companies are now actually training it to stop being in its language response, stop being both so confident and also stop being so agreeable. And then also, as I said, using retrieval augmented generation to force it to cite sources. And these are all problems that are conceptually non-technical problems, because a user has had to interact with AI to understand that overconfidence is a problem, or that too much agreement is a problem. And so if you were already a critical user, you could have started thinking about these problems in AI already, that like a lot of these big tech companies were not, because they were only thinking of it from a technical standpoint.
That's very insightful, and I have personally noticed how all the GPTs have agreed with me with so many questions that I've answered to the point कि मैं भी सोच रही हूँ कि भाई मतलब मैं तो कभी गलत ही नहीं हुई तो there's an interesting question, and Mohammed Hassan has asked this that you mentioned that coding and low coding jobs will be minimized. So, what do you think about the security as cybersecurity roles will be affected? I think this is very crucial to address. Case cybersecurity किस form पे change और layers के कितनी changes आएंगी उसकी?
Mhm. So that's a great question. I'm not an expert in cybersecurity, so you should ask a domain expert. But I will say that from where I stand, entire jobs will very it'll very unlikely that entire jobs will change, but specific aspects of a job will change. So think of it as, अगर एक teacher है, तो it's very unlikely कि पूरी की पूरी teaching job ही खत्म हो जाएगी. But एक teacher की specific tasks में कुछ चीजें automate होना आसान हो जाएंगी. Let's say syllabus generation, or let's say grading. And so even in cybersecurity, I imagine it would be the same, where um, will AI become better at detecting certain kinds of threats? Will AI become better at predicting certain kinds of threats? Will AI become better at patching, certain kinds of threats? But at the same time, is AI a threat in and of itself, right? Like, will the kinds of cyber attacks that start happening change and become more rapid because of AI? Already, some of the things that we're seeing is कि AI की वजह से कितनी ज़्यादा security issues हो रहे हैं because of the ways in which, like, privacy of users is not being respected. Private chats of users are being leaked. Now, increasingly, AI agents are coming in, which means that people are giving AI a lot of access to personal private data, like their emails. But uske piche privacy protocols kya hai? How much more vulnerable do we become to cyber attacks because we've actually given AI and like access? And AI ke piche obviously there's cloud, there's a lot of like companies, all of them access to our data. So both things are going to start happening, which is some cybersecurity roles are going to be transformed because AI is going to become better at like detecting threats, but it's also going to bring in new threats. So if you're a cybersecurity professional, think about this future. Think about how you could position yourself in a way where you can become the expert for cybersecurity for like AI agents, or teach companies how to think about privacy and data encryption in the world of like AI agents, for example.
Uh, okay. Thank you, Rida. There's a general. There are three, four questions of the same thing, and people are asking about how AI will be affecting healthcare, and if technologies like digital twins will be able to have an impact on healthcare as well as urban systems. And I feel this is very apt question considering you also have studied urban studies in from MIT. How in the current scenario of what Pakistan is facing as well with floods and everything, how can tech like AI or digital twinning can help us?
Yeah. So I think digital twins is actually super interesting because, so for people who don't know, digital twin is basically कि आप एक virtual twin बनाते हैं लोगों का. So if there's a patient, for example, or if I'm a patient, so to try to basically figure out what might be good, like healthcare interventions for me, someone might use AI to build out a virtual copy of my demographics, and then see, oh, if you, and then create these like hypothetical simulation scenarios of like, oh, if I were to give this person this medication, like what could happen. So I think it's very interesting. I think things to be aware of is that simulation modeling has always been a thing, right? Like agent based simulations have always been used in, like, like flood scenarios, and in predicting climate change, and predicting like impacts of climate change, for example, or predicting traffic, or like urban interventions, like what would happen if we put this train station in this city. How will this, like, and they would, we used to create these like agents, and we used to give them particular demographics and particular personality like traits, and then we'd say like, okay, how would the system now respond? And I think we've had limited success in the past with modeling. Obviously it's a huge field, but what we've understood is that there's only so much that these models can predict, because me as a human being, I am not just my demographics. अगर मेरी हेल्थ केयर, अगर मुझे हेल्थ केयर चाहिए, तो it's there's only so much about me that you can learn from my health records, around my testing, and from like other forms of data that you could access. So our data itself is always limited. So I think that's something to remember. So if you are thinking about digital twins, especially in a high stakes domain like healthcare, think about what data can tell you about a person and what data can just not tell you about a person. Because, for example, think about health records. That data is only as good as how well the person is giving you their medical history. And medical history is actually always been a huge problem in the field of healthcare, where like people just don't give you their medical history properly, because they forget, they don't know if something is important, they might not be noticing certain symptoms. So those problems will still exist. But I think so that's one thing. And then the second thing is, I think in like the policy space, so for example with like urban studies, the modeling can tell you some things, but that is only as useful as the policymakers who then use it. So you can, then again we come into the policy and governance space, which is you can create the best model that can give you the best outcomes. But if policymakers are not adopting it, if government is not doing anything about it, we could predict all the floods we want in Pakistan. The solutions would have to then come from adopting the results. So I think there is definitely huge scope in trying to think about how we can use increased power of AI to improve the kinds of modeling that we had done, and the simulations that we'd done, the kind of like early detection and like prevention that we'd started doing. But also think about what are the limitations, so what gets missed out, and how just the technical, like, digital twin or like simulation will not be enough to make changes. But I will say, if these are things you're interested in, there's actually like, and you might know all this already, for anything that you're curious about AI, digital twins for health, digital twins for like urban interventions, there's so much already like academic literature out there, that I would encourage everyone, because they're already like, these are just things that people are rapidly adopting. I would encourage everyone to like, keep reading things online, or use, if you want to use AI for summarizing things, start if there's this field that you're curious about, start reading about what people who are experts in those fields are saying about it. Newspaper articles, ask AI to
Definitely.
summarize those things.
Definitely. Um, we have another question. I feel like this question is something that everyone is generally asking, and this is from a teacher in our audience. And they are asking that, especially for high school and college level students, for instance, O levels and metric and A levels. So, what sort of skills do we teach? Because I feel like we are living in those times where the internet is telling you something else, but the educational content is just also like 10 years behind. It's not getting updated. तो वो थोड़ा सा dilemma हो गया है between teachers and students as well as parents. So what do you recommend? What sort of skills do we start teaching our students from that K-12 level?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, again, something that everyone in the world is struggling with. So this is obviously not, so
Hmm.
you should feel good about this. This is a huge question for everyone right
True,
now.
true.
Skills for the workforce, skills for, kids who are coming up. Um, and I will say that I think what people are now moving towards is we like critical thinking in partnership with technology. So increasingly like introducing technology at a younger age to kids, but not but in a way where we can teach kids how to critically think about technology, think about misinformation, think about, recognize like, oh, AI, where AI can be wrong, what like hallucinations look like, how to fact check it better. So like those kinds of things. Um, things like creativity. So not just rote learning, कि आपने बस एक syllabus दे दिया अब आप reproduce कर लो, because all of these now kinds of assignments that we used to test kids on, like memory for example, um, are no longer going to be as relevant, but also those assignments can all just be done by AI. You know, so some of the interesting assignments that people have started coming up with or the interesting ways in which they started using technology in the classroom is ask students to actually use AI to write like an essay, for example, but then become the kind of editor and critic of that essay. So make it write a first draft and then ask the students, the assignment is to check that and like edit it and like talk about all of the things that it misses. So as a way to like start teaching critical thinking skills, or um, use it to create something like creative and new and interesting that like let's say solves a problem that they have seen. So um, I think increasingly like teaching kids how to use these technologies as partners and as tools is important, but for that we will have to learn that also. It's very difficult for us to teach something that we don't know. So I think teachers will definitely have to be in a space where they'll have to start using these technologies also in more creative ways and be up to date with what is and is not possible with them. So I think teachers will also have to start thinking about how they can use what are the like gaps and limitations in AI, and that's how we can teach kids to be more critical of them.
Correct, correct, Rida. And I would like to tell the audience over here that in the coming few weeks, we'll also be focusing, bringing in and talking about how AI can be used in educational content and how to teach in this era of AI as well. So please stay tuned for that. Rida, since we have less time as well, there एक दो तीन सवाल मैं एक साथ आपसे कर देती हूँ जो लोग पूछ रहे हैं. एक जनरल सेंटिमेंट है चैट में कि इफ एआई इज डूइंग एवरीथिंग तो हमारी क्रिएटिविटी चली जाएगी. तो
Hmm.
आप एक तो उसके बारे में भी बताएं. फिर एक there is a very specific question that if AI can generate algorithms automatically, what will be the new role of computer scientists? आई थिंक ये आपने थोड़ा सा बताया भी था, बट थोड़ा सा इसके बारे में और इस चीज को बता दें. और ये भी एक चीज लोगों ने किया, सिंस योर रिसर्च इज अ लॉट ऑन एआई एथिक्स एंड ओवरऑल यूजेज एज वेल, कि क्या चीजें किस तरह हम ओवर यूज कर रहे हैं एआई को और किस तरह हम उसकी एथिक्स के बारे में उसकी एथिकल बाउंड्री में रह सकते हैं. तो या.
Okay, so first question was on our own creativity. Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think something that we should all think about, and that's all on all of us. But it's like कोई भी technology जब launch होती है, तो it comes with certain things it can give you and certain things it can take away from you, but it really depends on how you use it. Um, my thinking is that a lot of it's actually interesting because AI has actually helped reveal a lot of basic, it is challenging us to think about what makes us human. So a lot of things, that from everything from like assignments that we were giving students and how we were testing them, to what we thought like creativity is, it's almost like it's like a wake up call. कि हम, the reason like AI is so good at tests, for example, is maybe because the tests that we were designing were not the right tests. Or AI is, so good at interviews and like tech interviews. Maybe the interviews themselves were flawed also, because they were asking things that didn't make sense to test the capabilities of humans, right? So I think, so one bigger question definitely is, how do we think about the what is the actual capabilities that we bring? um and I would say, like, let's not think of it as so much as, our creativity will finish and our creativity will be replaced. It can be if we become lazy and if we ask it to do all our work for us. But I think there is learning how to interact with AI better, and how to use it to be more creative, how to use it maybe to do the things that like you don't necessarily want to focus on. So like if you want to make a presentation, let's say, using it as you would have a trusted friend or a colleague, to be like, hey, can you give me feedback on this? What would improve it? um, or like using it to bounce off different ideas that you have that are half baked, and in conversation you can learn more about those ideas and how to improve them. Or using it to give critical feedback on your work. Say, hey, like ChatGPT, or Gemini, or whatever you're using, be critical and tell me all of the things that are wrong with this idea that I have, so that I can improve on it. So I think it's a very powerful technology that we have access to. I think the thing I worry about is, when people use it to basically just say, oh, just write me a presentation, and then it just writes everything and they copy paste it and then they use it as is, because actually those are actually not also very high quality. So if you look at what AI produces when you just say write me a presentation, it gives very these like vague empty words. And if you're reading like Instagram posts and LinkedIn posts, you can automatically now start telling how much of it is AI written, because it's a lot of language and it's actually not communicating much. So I think like increasingly what will distinguish people is people who can look at like AI produced things and you improve on them. So I think your creativity is basically also like in your own hands a little bit. So learn how to use AI as a partner and not just as a replacement for like doing all your work. So that's one thing. I think thinking about the other question was about
If
responsibility. Yeah,
if AI algorithms are writing the codes and everything, so where do they leave
computer
computer
science.
scientists?
Yes. Okay. So okay, a couple of things. One, I think that the from going from just being like, oh, we'll just write code, and like, what people call it, like code monkeys, where you're just like sitting and just writing line upon code. um, Computer scientists, I think, are now increasingly being shifted to what, this like higher level kind of thinking. So design thinking, broadly thinking about how the entire system um, interacts with each other, how that algorithm fits into a broader infrastructure. um, you will still have to know how to code to analyze it and understand it and to make sure that it's doing the right thing. um, so I think the problem is more not computer science as a whole, but like the very entry level software engineering job where you're just doing coding and nothing else, and someone is telling you what to do and you're just writing line upon code. That will definitely now be impacted. But I think there's an opportunity to train yourself to be more of a problem solver, to be this like design thinker, to be this like supervisor, to be someone who can work at like a higher level of conceptualizing the problem, translating the problem, using computational thinking to address problems. So I think that's kind of like, your kind of like higher level system design and oversight role, and thinking about collaboration. I think the new roles that are coming up, so actually, I'll answer the AI ethics question together also. So governance, ethics, product managers are increasingly coming up. So CS, foundational CS knowledge will be helpful in developing out these roles and like having these roles, because you need to have that CS knowledge to be able to look at something AI is producing. And so think of yourself, if you're a computer scientist, as what is the plus that you can bring? What is the hybrid thing that you can bring beyond your foundational CS knowledge? And then ethics, extremely important question. And I think there's almost like a parallel job market being created. So there's like big tech, and then there's all of these jobs now being created around transparency, privacy, you know, governance, um, interpretability, security. Um, some of these do need some computer science skills. So, you know, some of these do need skills around identifying, let's say, a potential privacy or bias risk, and then like trying to figure out how to address these. But some of these are non-technical roles. There'll be roles around like, you know, what standards to set for AI. And so these interdisciplinary skills, I think, apply as much to ethics as they do to like computer scientists. So increasingly, I think of the world as moving into a very interesting space where all of the things that we assumed were valuable are up for change and grab. And so I think with each of these kinds of crises comes a lot of opportunity. And so our opportunity, I think, is to think about, for the next 5 to 10 years, with the speed of technological change, what are the interdisciplinary human collaboration, creative ways in which we can use AI in our lives and our careers. And yeah, I'm very happy if, you know, if people have other questions. To
We will take one more question, and this is a question that most people asked. Uh, if you could recommend some AI tools. Well, they were pretty specific questions कि आप marketing और sales के लिए कुछ बता दें, कुछ चीजें कहा है कि academic research के लिए बता दें, किसी ने कहा है कि daily usage के लिए बता दें, किसी ने कहा है students को use करके बता दें. तो आप अगर इस चीज को summarize करके जो आपको पसंद है, या you know about that they add value or they add significance in something that we are doing, वो AI tools के बारे में बता दें. और आप प्लीज इस चीज को भी टच कर दें कि a lot of people are asking from where to start their AI journey if they want to start it. So अगर आप इसको एक road map दे दें, it's up to you whether you want to do it from a tech viewpoint or a non-tech background viewpoint, and then we will wrap it up.
Okay, so AI tools. So I think the first question to ask would be, you know, what do you want to use the AI tools for? So things like the free version of ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, which is also pretty good. I think are वही जो वाला general purpose tools that can do a lot of different things, but maybe they cannot do things. They're not designed in terms of the interface or the interaction to do a specific thing. So if you just want to, like, you know, daily use, write and get help writing an email, get help thinking about a presentation, doing some light coding, like things like ChatGPT and like Gemini and Claude, which are these big general purpose models, are good. But then there are like specifically trained models that have been trained to do very specific things, and their interface allows you to do those things. So for example, Adobe has Firefly, which is specifically just for design. Or there are tools like Windsurf that are specifically for coding, you know, or Replit, for example, which is specifically for like real time, like building like deploying, building and deploying, you know, small prototypes very, very quickly. So I think depending on what you want to use an AI tool for, not all of these are free. So some of these, you know, will require some sort of subscription. So that's also something to remember. Unfortunately, you know, like these technology companies are launching products where the free tier is going to be is not going to be as good as the paid tier, which is unfortunate. But yeah, so I think it really just depends on what you want to use it for. Not There will not be specifically designed AI models for all use cases, and again, that's an opportunity to think about if there is a particular use case you have in mind and an AI tool doesn't exist for it, like thinking about what that could look like. But yeah, generally for most general purpose usages, these like ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude type models will help. But again, be critical when you use them. Try to know that they are not like experts. So build your own expertise while you are, or use them to build your own expertise. And then things like Windsurf and Replit for software engineering. And similarly, like you'll find just do a search of what AI tools for X or Y Z. Um, AI roadmap, I think, is a little bit harder to answer. And I think, atomcamp might be better suited to answer it because it really depends on what journey you want to take. Do you want a journey towards like AI product management? Do you want a journey towards AI governance? Do you want a journey towards, like AI for healthcare? Someone mentioned digital twins, right? So these are all going to take slightly different pathways. And I think, like places like atomcamp where they have course lists and structured ways of engaging with some of these. Or if you go to these free courses like Coursera or Udemy, a lot of universities actually like open source um, their courses. So if you go to like, if you search like uh, course free AI courses or Coursera AI, you'll find a lot of like new courses that give you a step-by-step roadmap. And so there are going to be many, many different ones depending on what you want to do.
That is great. Thank you, Rida. Thank you so much for your time. I would like to conclude this by saying that um, we we do talking about the roadmap. We do offer these courses. Currently we are offering data science and AI, our flagship course. We are offering AI automation course, and there's always a data analytics course which is for the most beginners. And if you have never stepped into the technical journey, this is the course for you. And for more advanced people, the AI course is for you. uh, the free courses always exist, and we always tell everyone to take these courses or pay. um, we You also take our courses, and then we can talk about कि आपकी पर्सनल जर्नी किस तरह हो सकती है एआई के किसी भी करियर पाथवे पे, हेल्थ केयर में हो, अर्बन में हो, एजुकेशन में हो, किसी चीज के लिए भी हो, हम उसमें आपको वन ऑन शिप मेंटोरशिप भी देते हैं. But thank you so much, Rida. Thank you for your time. I believe this was very successful. A lot of people tuned in to listen to what you had to say, and that is, of course, always our success. And all it's an initiative of the ministry. So this was great to have youth coming in and asking you questions. I would like to clarify one more thing, and that is that this is a webinar and we will not be giving you e-certificates. However, this is a recorded webinar and we will be uploading this on YouTube, and we will be sending you the link on your emails. Have a good night in Pakistan, and
So much.
Rida, have a good day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Khudafis.